Hello, everyone. I'm Olympia. Thank you for being here with me in this wonderful place called Lights Out Library. And I have a great story to tell you. Tonight, we are in a forest in the south of Mexico, in Yucatan, surrounded by lush vegetation, flowers, and the soft sound of water drops falling from the leaves. We have a lot of stories and history to explore. So please, make yourself comfortable and let your imagination travel with me. Travel above the desert, the mountains, the shores, and the jungles of Central America and Mexico. Our first story is going to be about the creation of the world according to the Popol Vuh, the book of legends and historical tales left by the Quiche people, the people that live in modern Guatemala and belong to the Mayan culture area. The Popol Vuh is a prominent written source about Maya cosmology, their vision of the universe and of the world they lived in, and also about Maya myths and legends. But first, allow me to take a few seconds of your time to let you know that we have a Patreon page for those of you who wish to and can support this project, get more of it, and listen ad-free on your favorite podcast app. Patreon is a platform that allows you to contribute directly to our work financially. Our least expensive tier is $3.50 per month, but it doesn't mean you will get less. But regardless what you can contribute, everyone gets everything that is on our page, because the world is a better place when the sun shines for everyone. You will gain access to several exclusive episodes, and we add one every month. And also all our episodes with and without background sounds that you can download to listen offline. We offer advance releases to our patrons as well. We have added links to Patreon, as well as links to different streaming options, which may be better suited for you. You will find them in the description of the episode. But before we begin, allow yourself to forget about any worries. If you wish to, you may close your eyes and immerse yourself in the story. Assume a comfortable position. Maybe move a bit to settle. Take a long, deep, relaxing breath, and when you slowly exhale, feel your shoulders drop. Release the tension in your neck. Let your face soften and your jaw relax. Make sure your fingers are not clenched and that your legs are relaxed too. And allow the sound of my voice to guide you through this journey. First, let's explore a Maya world creation myth. There was a time at the very beginning of the world when only the sky and the sea existed as far as one can see. There was only this monotonous expanse of water under an empty sky. But there were beings in this world. There were gods, and 7 gods gathered. 4 of them were the guardians of the 4 angles of the universe, and there were 3 more. Tepeu, the worker god; Kukulkan, the feathered serpent covered in green feathers; and Huracan, the god of wind, of storms, and of fire. These 7 divine entities shined in the dark, and if there had been any other living creature around to see them, their light would have been blinding. But there was none, and that was the topic of their conversation. The world was empty, dull, and needed to be populated by beings that would know the existence of the gods and worship them. So they agreed to start modeling the world. And Huracan, the god of winds and fire, started the process by throwing lightning bolts, by making the thunder roll, and by shouting the word earth. Immediately in this chaos, the land began to emerge from the sea. Mountains rose towards the sky in a deafening noise. Valleys formed. Large plains and deserts appeared as the water receded. And that wasn't all. The power of Huracan also made vegetation grow in these landscapes, covering them in all shades of green. The other gods watched this and liked this new world, which was now more varied and interesting, but still empty of beings. One of the gods observed that this world would be useless if there was no one to congratulate and worship them. The gods thought they should now create beings, and they started working on it. Each of them used their imagination, and this was how they created the first inhabitants of Earth: the birds, the snakes, and the beasts. They didn't only create them in all sorts of colors, sizes, and species. They also gave them a language, a different language for each species, in the hope that all these animals would sing their praises and use their language to glorify their creators. Finally, they decided that these animals would be the guardians of the plants. Once they were done, the gods gathered again and told the animals that it was now time for them to start singing their praises, honoring the gods, and celebrating this wonderful creation. But it didn't go as planned. The animals were not intelligent enough, and all they could do was chirp, hiss, or roar. The gods were disappointed and realized that the animals they had created were far from perfect. So they sentenced the animals to be forever hunted and eaten, and decided to move on. They needed to create other beings that would be sensitive and smart enough to show gratitude to their creators. They decided to create humans. But what material would be appropriate? They thought of clay, and with clay they molded an entire people of human beings. They animated them and gave them a language. But once again, the results were disappointing. The sculptures could move and speak, but they turned out to be as stupid as the animals that had preceded them. They were stiff, they couldn't turn their heads, and they didn't feel anything, which made them unable to correctly worship their creators. That was another failure. So the gods destroyed these failed clay humans and searched for a building material that would produce more intelligent creatures. They thought of wood, And soon, wooden humans populated the emerged world. They could speak, they reproduced, and they had abilities that their clay predecessors lacked, like using tools or building houses. But these wooden humans were still heartless and limited. They showed no curiosity, no feelings, and they completely ignored their creators because they lived in the most superficial layer of their conscience, unable to dig deeper and become spiritual. Once again, the gods were disappointed, and they condemned this second race of humans to disappear. They sent a dark, thick rain over the world, and only a handful of these wooden humans survived, finding refuge in the woods where, according to the legend, their descendants still live, having taken the form of little monkeys that live in the trees. Once again, the gods congregated and spoke of the material they could use for their next attempt. They needed a substance noble enough that could be used to make the flesh and blood of humans and would give them life and strength, but also intelligence and emotions. As they were thinking, 4 animals came to them and told them that they knew a material that corresponded to their search. The animals took the gods to a place where there was wild corn growing. The animals took the yellow and white grains of corn, crushed them, and added water to form a paste. They offered this paste to the gods and told them that they should make humans with it. The gods tried it and made 4 humans with that corn paste, and this time it worked. These humans were very intelligent and sensitive. They worshipped their creators instinctively and called them by their names. Their sight was also perfect, even in the dark. They could see so far away that they saw the limits of the universe and could not only see, but understand the true nature of the cosmos. And they were so smart that they quickly became as knowledgeable and capable as the gods. This was starting to become worrisome for the gods. Maybe these humans were a bit too perfect. So the gods decided to limit their powers. They obscured their sight. The 4 men could no longer see the whole universe. Instead, they were now limited to their immediate surroundings. And with the loss of this perception, the loss of the understanding of the nature, the dimensions, and the limits of the world, the men lost most of their wisdom and intelligence. Sentenced as they were to live in a world they could not really comprehend, lost in a partial vision that would make them develop ill-informed prejudices and desperately search for a meaning that they were now unable to grasp. Still, some of their intelligence and sensitivity remained, and the gods were satisfied. As the night came, they formed the 4 women with the same corn paste, also blinding them to the true reality of the universe. And when the men woke up in the morning, they found their new companions, the 8 ancestors, 4 men and 4 women of the Quiche people were born, and they would multiply until one day their descendants would retell this story in the Popol Vuh. As always, in world creation myths, this one provides an explanation for the origin of the world and of humans, with some aspects that remind us of other creation narratives. For example, forming humans with clay or food, the creation of humans happening at the end after the creation of animals, the appearance of land in a world where there was only sea at the beginning, and the creation of women on the model of men once men had been validated. These are elements that appear in different creation narratives from around the world, including the Bible. And as always, the story provides explanations about the place of humans in the world, typically as the last and favorite creation of God or gods, and also the most complicated one, with its flaws and abilities that distinguish us from the animal kingdom. Now, there is not one Mesoamerican mythology, far from that, with its different cultures and thousands of years of independent cultural development before the arrival of Europeans. Mesoamerica, which corresponds to the southern half of Mexico and several countries of Central America, had a wealth of cultures that rose and sometimes fell long before the end of the Pre-Columbian period. The most famous are the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Maya, and the Aztecs. But there were more, and they had big differences, yet they were in contact. They showed similar levels of technical development and shared many cultural traits. Their aesthetics, their production of crafts, and their works of art, their societies, their vision of the world, their beliefs, and their myths were at the same time different but connected. It is a bit like the Fertile Crescent in the Middle East, another cradle of human civilization. Different cultures and ethnicities that were separate, but also sharing cultural traits that spread to the entire region and came back transformed as cultures and states rose and fell throughout many centuries. So it makes sense to look at Mesoamerican myths as a whole, as long as we bear in mind the distances in space and time between these different cultures. Some narratives circulated, their cosmologies had similarities. And this is why I tell you about Maya and Aztec myths together. Tonight, as I tell you more of these stories, you will notice that some motives come back. For example, the feathered serpent. I just told you about the Maya feathered serpent, Kukulkan, and in a minute we will hear about Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec feathered serpent. This myth lasted for centuries, possibly thousands of years. When the Aztecs rose in the northern part of Mesoamerica in central Mexico, the Maya had long passed their peak as powerful and wealthy city-states. Maya culture had survived the abandonment of these large Maya cities like Palenque, Chichen Itza, or Tikal. But politically and militarily, the Maya had declined so much that they could barely oppose the conquest by Spanish conquistadors when they arrived in the 16th century. This was the time when the Popol Vuh, this text about mythical tales, the history, cosmology, and the gods of the ancient Maya, was composed by the Quiche. These people that belong to the Maya cultural area. The story I just told you is not necessarily the only Maya creation history. It is just one that the Quiche happened to have and compiled in the Popol Vuh. But it is well possible that this is just one tradition, one version of the story, and maybe Maya mythology was way more diverse. We cannot know for sure because lots of writings were lost. They were lost before the Spanish arrived in the south of Mexico, because the Maya had declined centuries earlier, and also after, as the Maya population was converted to Christianity. Most Maya texts were destroyed because they were considered pagan. We do not know to what extent exactly, but part of their body of legends, and maybe historical texts too, were lost like this. So it is a bit like Norse mythology, which I have already told you about in past episodes. We know it through very few sources. In the case of the old Norse mythology stories, these sources are mainly the poetic and the prose Eddas, that are texts written in Iceland at the very end or even after the Old Norse period. And in the case of the Maya, there is the Popol Vuh and a few other texts written in the 16th century, at the time when pre-Columbian cultures of Mexico were being dramatically hit and changed forever by the Spanish conquest. So the Popol Vuh, like the Eddas written in Iceland, are like the late remains of dying worlds, which make them very precious culturally, but they may only contain the tip of an iceberg of narratives and beliefs that has entirely disappeared. So I told you about the diversity of civilizations that rose and fell in Mesoamerica. They were diverse, but also in contact. And a good way to illustrate this is to look at another, different creation myth. This time we're going to travel north to central Mexico, and I'm going to tell you about the myth of the 5 suns, the narratives of the Nahuatl, one of the indigenous people of Mexico, to which the Toltecs, the Tlaxcaltecas, or the Mexica, the Aztecs belong. You will recognize specific details that were also part of the Maya myths, and the story goes like this. We think we live in the only world that ever was, but this is not true. We are in the 5th world to ever exist. Before our time, there were 4 different worlds, topped by 4 different suns. And the tumultuous story of these 5 worlds and their 5 suns goes as follows. The world began when the universe was only void, and from this void happened the greatest miracle ever. The first God created himself from nothing, himself or herself, because this first divinity was the God of duality, Ometeotl. Ometeotl was both male and female. It contained all dual principles that would one day become familiar: life and death, night and day, male and female. Ometeotl could have children alone, and the divinity gave birth to 4 children, the 4 Tezcatlipocas, who were guardians of the 4 cardinal directions, one each. The guardian of the west was Quetzalcoatl, the white-feathered serpent, god of light, wind, and knowledge. Opposite to him, to the east, was Xipe-Totec, the red god of gold, agriculture, and the seasons. The guardian of the southern corner was Huitzilopochtli, the blue god of the sun and war. Finally, to the north was Tezcatlipoca the Black. He was the god of judgment and magic. These 4 gods, these 4 brothers born from Ometeotl, created the world and space between them. And the center of this world was the city of Teotihuacan, meaning the birthplace of the gods. The 4 gods populated this world with other gods that they created, especially Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. On the land they had made emerge in the middle of the ocean, they put animals and a race of giants. This world needed light, and for this it needed a sun. One of them had to become a sun. Tezcatlipoca, the black guardian of the north, was chosen to fulfill this role. He transformed into a sun. But maybe because of his dark nature, Tezcatlipoca could only become a half-sun, and the world stayed quite dark. Still, life continued like this for a while, but the other 3 gods were not very satisfied with this dark world, and a sibling rivalry developed between Tezcatlipoca the Black and Quetzalcoatl the White, the feathered serpent of the West. Eventually, Quetzalcoatl decided he had had enough. He took a stone club and hit his brother with it, knocking this half-sun from the sky. Tezcatlipoca was infuriated at having lost his place as the sun, and as revenge, he sent his jaguars to eat all the people of this world. It was only fair to him that if he could not be the sun, no one would live in this now completely dark world. Ravaged by the jaguars of Tezcatlipoca, this world died. And this is how the first world under the first sun disappeared. The time for a second sun had come. The gods created new humans who were smaller, of regular size, and they repopulated the world, ravaged by the wrath of Tezcatlipoca the Black. Now Quetzalcoatl the White, the feathered serpent of the West, served as the new sun, the second sun. Under him, a new civilization developed on Earth. But contrary to his expectations, this new breed of humans failed the gods. Instead of worshiping them and following their teachings, the men became greedy and corrupt. Quetzalcoatl was disappointed. He became lost in his thoughts, and that was the moment Tezcatlipoca the Black waited for. Using his magic, he transformed humans into monkeys. The monkeys dispersed in the wilderness, and Quetzalcoatl accepted this failure by stepping down from his role as the sun in order to craft a new race of humans that would be closer to perfection. And with this ended the reign of Quetzalcoatl as a second sun, leaving once again the world empty of humans. But it was not over. The gods had created new humans and repopulated the world with them. So a new sun, a third one, was now needed. Tlaloc, the god of rain created by the four brothers at the start of the universe, was chosen to be this new sun. But Tezcatlipoca, the Black Guardian of the North, had not been appeased yet, and was still furious for having been knocked off the sky in his role as the first sun. In retaliation, he captured Xochiquetzal, who Tlaloc was in love with, the goddess of beauty and fertility. Tlaloc became so consumed by her disappearance that he no longer fulfilled his role as god of the rain. Now turned into a sun, he warmed the earth, but without rain, a great drought began, and the people of the world went hungry and thirsty. They prayed desperately, but the god was too distracted, and the drought seemed it would last forever. Finally, Tlaloc had a fit of rage one day and sent a rain of fire upon the earth. What remained of vegetation and people was consumed, leaving only ashes in the emerged world. After that, Tlaloc abandoned his role as the sun and went into hiding, overwhelmed by grief. This was how the world was destroyed again, and the age of the third sun ended, leaving only a lifeless, barren land plunged into darkness. Still, the gods did not abandon their idea to create a world. They worked together to create a new earth, fertile again, and life reappeared on it after the devastation caused by Tlaloc. A new sun, the fourth one, was necessary, and this time the choice of the gods went to a goddess, Chalchiuhtlicue, the goddess of water, the sea, and rivers. Chalchiuhtlicue was renowned for her capacity to be tender and loving. She was popular among gods and people, and so she was believed to be a good choice, and indeed, a happy and harmonious period began on earth. Animals lived their lives and multiplied. Humans praised the gods and were generally happy under the warmth and light given by the fourth sun. And the gods finally felt proud of their creation. All the gods save one. Tezcatlipoca the Black was angry and resentful as ever, and couldn't stand to see a happy world under another sun than him. Full of venom, he approached Chalchiuhtlicue and told her that she was not really sweet and loving, that it was just a facade to gain the people's praise. He said to her that deep down she was fake and selfish. Chalchiuhtlicue was so crushed by these mean words that she started crying. Her pain at realizing that such evil was possible, and her doubts about her true nature were so intense that she couldn't stop crying, and the world under her paid the price for it as her tears fell and fell on the land. A massive flood overwhelmed the earth for 52 years. Almost everyone drowned on earth, except for a few humans that became fish in order to survive. The gods understood that the water goddess would no longer be fit to be sun, and once again they decided to restart everything. This is how the fourth sun ended, and a new era began, the fifth sun, our era. The new sun would be the blue garden of the south and the god of war, Huitzilopochtli, who also is the god of the sun in our era because he is the sun now. Since Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, had always been the best defender of humans, he didn't accept the new destruction of his people. So he went to the underworld and stole the bones of humans from the god of death, after which he dipped the bones in his own blood to resurrect humans. When they opened their eyes, humans found this new sun, this new world, and they praised Quetzalcoatl for his miracle. But as humans repopulated the earth, another conflict was about to burst in the sky this time. Huitzilopochtli was not the only deity living in the sky. Far from that. There were plenty of lesser gods and goddesses hidden by his light. These deities became jealous of the fifth sun, and they organized behind the goddess of the moon that led them in an assault on the sun, on Huitzilopochtli. And so began a war in the sky that is still ongoing. When we see Huitzilopochtli dominate, his light is everywhere, and we call this the day. But regularly, the other deities attack again and come close to beating him. This is the night, when the light vanishes and the moon and all the other deities of the sky, the stars, become visible. We have to pray that Huitzilopochtli will never lose this fight, because if his light disappears and the world is plunged into constant darkness, if the fifth sun is vanquished from the sky, our world will also end like the four worlds before. For this reason, men do sacrifices to Huitzilopochtli. Sacrifices are nourishment to the sun, to help in its fight and to ensure that daylight returns. Another threat is the existence of Tezcatlipoca, the vengeful black guardian of the north, who was responsible for the end of several suns before ours. He also must be appeased with sacrifices. And finally, in honor of Quetzalcoatl, the serpent, a more benevolent figure, humans spill some of their blood, sometimes as a gift to show gratitude to the God that brought our kind back to life in this world. So, this is the story of the world, and these are the reasons why we must stay humble to the gods and offer sacrifices to fortify Huitzilopochtli and to appease Tezcatlipoca, because if we don't, may well come to an end. This mythical narrative has plenty of variations, That was just one Aztec version among others. It is likely that in the Pre-Columbian period, there were variants of the same myth across the various Nahuatl-speaking peoples. So, what do these terms mean? Nahuatl, Mexica, Aztec? They are different things. Nahuatl is a language, or a group of related languages that was spoken in central Mexico. It appeared, at least in the 7th century AD, even though Spanish is by far the main language in modern Mexico. Nahuatl has not disappeared and still has around 1.7 million native speakers today, most of them still living in central Mexico. Now, Nahuatl was the language of the Mexica, and the Mexica are a people who lived essentially in the Valley of Mexico in pre-Columbian times. Aztec is a word that is a bit imprecise because it can refer at the same time to a civilization, a state, the Aztec Empire, or sometimes to a people. These people, being the Mexica, but not all the Mexica, were part of the Aztec Empire, at least at the beginning, before they were subjugated. Initially, this famous Aztec Empire was an alliance of 3 Mexica city-states, Tenochtitlan, which was located at the center of what is now Mexico City, built on an island on a lake which has now disappeared under the capital of Mexico and its more than 20 million inhabitants. And the other 2 cities were Texcoco and Tlacopan. This triple alliance conquered much of central Mexico. It expanded well beyond the valley where it had originated, with a mix of war and diplomacy. So the Aztecs subjugated various other peoples, turning them into kinds of vassals with what seems to have been a lot of brutality. When the Spanish arrived in Mexico in the 16th century, one of the reasons for their successful conquest of the Aztecs was the revolt of these peoples against their former masters, which dislocated the Aztec Empire. Now, Aztec is also the name of a civilization, one of several from Mesoamerica, because even though the Aztec Empire emerged only a century before the Spanish conquest, it was relatively short-lived. It covered a cultural area in central Mexico with a specific culture that carried the legacy of previous cultures, but forming a powerful, coherent state for decades. This is why this Nahuatl-speaking and Mexica-dominated empire of the Aztecs is also called a civilization. What we call Aztec mythology is in fact the body of myths of several groups of Mexica ethnicity and Nahuatl language. We already named some of their main gods and goddesses in the story of the 5 sons, but the complexity of their pantheon went well beyond that. One thing that can be confusing for people who know more about Middle Eastern and Mediterranean antique pantheons, Egypt, Greece, Rome, is that the Aztec gods had areas that they were responsible for, concepts attached to their names like war, sun, fire, rain, death, which is familiar. But there were several of them for each concept, with subtle variations, and sometimes different gods were in charge of the same thing. For example, there were several water deities. I told you about Tlaloc, the god of falling water, rain, and also lightning and thunder. Tlaloc, together with Huitzilopochtli, reportedly the god of war and the fifth sun, as we have seen, were two of the most popular gods of the Aztecs. They had huge monuments, huge pyramids at the center of the capital, Tenochtitlan. Apart from Tlaloc, another deity of water was Chalchutlique, the fourth sun, the goddess of horizontal water, streams, rivers, lakes, and seas. And there were more. Another water god was Atlawa, who was apparently revered by fishermen, but not alone. There was a second god of fishing and bird catching, also a god of water called Opochitli. There are even more gods of the sky, more than a dozen main ones that are identified separately, including the four guardians of the cardinal directions. There was a god of the sun, Tonatiuh, which was about the concept of sun, whereas the actual sun was the god Huitzilopochtli, as we have seen. Another characteristic of the Aztec Pantheon is that it seems to have been in constant evolution. When new peoples were conquered, their beliefs were not eliminated or even rejected. They were allowed to go on with their rituals and deities, which would sometimes be added to the Aztec pantheon and venerated in the capital. For example, the god Xipetotec, which was one of the four guardians in the story of the five sons, the deity of the east associated with the color red, was initially a god of another people, the Tlapanecas. And obviously, as the Aztecs were a late civilization in Mesoamerica, emerging after thousands of years of culture, they inherited beliefs from before that were widespread in the entire region. As I mentioned before, the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl is in fact a figure that appeared across the entire Mesoamerica. Beyond the differences in languages and ethnicities, it is an equivalent to the Maya feathered serpent, Kukulkan, the same from the villain, Tezcatlipoca, the god of the north, which appears as an antagonist opposed to the more benevolent Quetzalcoatl, Quetzalcoatl being the bringer of life for mankind, whereas Tezcatlipoca is the destructor or the one that schemes to cause destruction. Other Mesoamerican pantheons had an equivalent to this malevolent or evil figure, with similar attributes that show the circulation of cultural traits from the Maya region all the way north to central Mexico, and probably even beyond. After the conquest, quickly came the time of conversion to Christianity, and all natives were invited to abandon their old beliefs to embrace Catholicism. When I say invited, I mean forced. That was the kind of invitation they could not really refuse. It was enforced, sometimes brutally, when needed. And this was the time when a lot of Aztec and other pre-Columbian documents were destroyed because they were considered pagan, and the belief system they represented, not just the gods, but the entire cosmology, had to be suppressed. But even though Mexico became overwhelmingly Christian, all the beliefs did not die, did not fully disappear. Either they were kept alive secretly, or more often, they mixed with Christianity. That is to say, there was syncretism, the mix of religious traditions into new ones. An example of possible syncretism and this mixing of traditions in Mexico is the Day of the Dead, El Día de los Muertos. You have certainly seen the iconography attributed to it, with the skulls or people painting their faces to look like skulls. This is a traditional celebration in Mexico on the 1st and 2nd of November. The 1st of November being obviously the Christian All Saints' Day. Why this specific Mexican tradition with the skulls and the skeletons? It is believed because El Día de Muertos is the merger of Christian and pre-Hispanic celebrations. The Aztecs also celebrated the dead and had gods of the dead represented with the symbol of bones and skulls. Now, things are never that straightforward, and scholars do not necessarily agree on what is pre-Columbian and what is European or Christian in this celebration. The way the Dia de Muertos is celebrated also reminds one of a medieval European motive called the Danse Macabre. You've probably seen it too. Danse Macabre is one of these scenes with skeletons dancing around graves. It's a kind of allegory on the universality and the unavoidability of death, basically telling that for all of us, rich or poor, weak or powerful, happy or unhappy, death is at the end of the road in this world, and we are all equals before it. So, are the Mexican skulls more of Aztec or European origin? It is hard to say for sure, but this way of celebrating the Dia de Muertos and this iconography are present in Mexico and not in other Latin American countries. So the Mesoamerican heritage seems to have mattered in this somewhat. What is certain, anyway, is that the worshipping of pre-Columbian deities never fully disappeared. It went into hiding. And here, another illustration is the increased visibility and following in the past few decades of a Mexican religious movement called Santa Muerte, or Nuestra Señora de la Santa Muerte, Our Lady of Holy Death. This cult worships a personification of death, Santa Muerte, represented as a female skeleton in a long robe adorned with flowers, jewels, often a crown and a globe. It seems this cult has become increasingly prominent, despite condemnations by the Catholic Church and different Protestant pastors. Condemnation for being a pagan form of idolatry, for a figure that mainstream Christian traditions do not recognize. But religious considerations aside, what is interesting culturally and ethnographically is that the entire iconography of Santa Muerte obviously mixes Christian elements. The way the figure is represented is inspired by the depiction of saints or the Virgin Mary in Catholic images and paintings. So there is this Christian inspiration together with pagan elements, and by pagan I mean Aztec or Pre-Columbian. The Aztecs had a goddess of death called Mictecacíhuatl. one of several deities of death, and she was also represented as a skeletal figure together with her husband, the god of death too. They ruled over the lowest level of the Aztec underworld, so she was a representation of extreme death, ultimate death, the kind of state you don't come back from. It seems Mictecacihuatl was a popular figure before the arrival of the Spanish because we have representations of her. That's how we know she was pictured as a skeleton, and because her cult survived Christianization, it could never be eradicated. The secret persistence of her cult is assumed because regularly the figure of a skeletal female goddess reappeared along the centuries. This is documented in the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries. Now, was it an underground movement that sporadically became visible? Or was it reinvented several times by people who wanted to rediscover and reappropriate the native heritage? It is hard to tell. What is clear is that there is direct inspiration from this Aztec goddess in the modern figure of Santa Muerte. And this is not a marginal movement. The number of followers of this cult, maybe some more casually than others, and many may understand Santa Muerte more as a Catholic saint than a pagan goddess, but still, the number of followers is estimated to be more than 10 million people nowadays, mostly in Mexico. We have spoken of creation myths, of the cosmology they described and different gods. This is not exhaustive at all. It is just a quick look at a large and abundant region of the world when it comes to ancient cultural and mythological traditions. But Mesoamerica also had heroes, and to conclude this overview, we are going to go back south to Maya country and discover the story of the hero twins that defied and ultimately vanquished the gods of death in the underworld. You remember that in our first story, the Quiche Maya myth of creation, the gods had formed men from corn, from maize. This is revealing of the importance of corn, which was the base cereal of the Maya and across Mesoamerica. It was the most important crop, so they had a maize god, Hunahpu. But what was his origin story? Once upon a time, there were two sons that were twins, Hunahpu and Ixbalanque. The two twins turned out to be very good at the traditional ball game, which consisted of throwing a ball through a vertical ring attached to a wall, only using elbows and knees. But the two brothers used to play on a court that was just above the place where the gods of death lived, in Xibalba, the underworld. These 12 gods, the lords of Xibalba, ruled over death, and each of them had a domain. Sickness, fear, pain, all that could make living creatures suffered was governed by them, and so they were feared and disliked. No person in their right mind would have ever descended to Xibalba, where countless traps and other dangers would await them. Unfortunately for the two twins, the gods of Xibalba had been annoyed by the noise they made when they played just above them, and they tricked the twins they invited them to come play the ball game down in their world. When the twins descended, they were captured and killed. That was one story more to add to the long list of bad things that the 12 gods of Xibalba had done. But the story did not end there. When Hunahpu was not completely dead, his head, which had been severed, could still talk. And one day, the head was found by a princess who talked to it. Such was the power and the fertility of Hunahpu that she became pregnant. The princess gave birth to twins, and they were educated in the memory of their father and knew what had happened to him. They also turned out to be gifted at the ball game, and they played on the court where their father and their uncle had once played, just above the home of the 12 gods of Xibalba. Once again, the gods heard the noise they made. They were annoyed, and they invited them to come play in Xibalba. The gods had all sorts of traps in their realm: a river of blood, another one full of scorpions, holes in the ground, and if by chance visitors survived all this, they would defeat them on the ball game court and take their lives as a price of their defeat. But the two twins knew better than throwing themselves into this obvious trap, and instead of naively accepting the invitation like their father, they sent a mosquito down to Xibalba to spy on the evil gods and their traps. The mosquito returned and told them everything so that they arrived prepared. They avoided all the traps, and it came down to the ball game in the ball game court of Xibalba. And there, the two twins turned out to be so good that they defeated the evil gods playing against them, the same two gods that had killed their father years earlier. They killed two evil gods, and because of that, they could bring back their father, coming back to life. When Hunahpu had completed the first of many cycles, he had died, disappeared underground, and come back to life. He became the god of maize, and the very same material our kind was formed with. Just like corn, we appear, we grow, we die, and we disappear, but never fully, via our offspring. Part of us reappears, grows, lives, dies, and so on, in a succession of cycles that will last as long as the gods allow our world to exist. We have come to the end of our little journey tonight. I hope you enjoyed this adventure, and I invite you to discover and learn more. Now you can let go and sleep, or if you're not sleepy yet, you may pick another story from my ever-growing library. And until we meet again, good night. Sleep well.